radio. Yep. Good evening. It is now 6 p.m. on Thursday, November 20th, 2025, and I call this meeting of the Bellevue Planning Commission to order. Please join me reciting the Pledge of Allegiance.
I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all.
May I please have a roll call vote?
Mr. Arney, Mr. Bennett,
Here.
Mr. Sims, Miss Taylor-Jones,
Here.
Mr. Hankins,
Present.
Mr. Yoder, Mr. Ackley,
Here.
Mr. Lazenberg, Mr. Perrin.
Here.
All right, we have a quorum. This meeting will be conducted in accordance with the Nebraska Open Meetings Act, a copy of which can be found in the rear wall of the City Council chambers. At this time, I would ask that all commissioners and all audience members to please silence or turn off cell phones or any other device that could disrupt our proceedings. Thank you. At this time, I'd entertain a motion to revise or approve the Planning Commission's meeting minutes for the September 23rd, 2025 regular meeting.
Motion to approve is written.
Second.
Motion by Ackley, second by Taylor-Jones. Please vote.
I've got nothing yet here.
Refresh.
I say I haven't gotten anything either.
She goes, come on, Acme.
It's always one in every crowd. There you go.
Oh, look at that. Thank you.
At this time, I'd like to accept into the record all staff reports, attachments, memos, and handouts regarding each application. Staff, any updates or additions?
No updates.
Commissioners, do I have a motion?
I move that we accept into the record all staff reports, attachments, memos, and handouts as submitted.
I'll second.
Motion by Taylor-Jones, second by Bennett. Please vote.
Okay, all voting yes, motion carried.
All right, we have one item for public hearing this evening. I will announce the case and then ask if there are any updates from the planning department. After that, the applicant will have an opportunity to present their request. After the applicant has been heard, the public will be allowed to provide any testimony that they would like to be considered in the record. Those testifying should come to the podium, state their name, address, and sign in for the record. Testimony should be limited to 3 minutes, and I reserve the right to shorten that time if we have a large number of people coming forward to testify. After any testimony is taken, the applicant will have the opportunity for rebuttal, after which we will close the public hearing. Bottom line, use the golden rule. Treat others who are speaking in the same manner as you would like to be treated when speaking. Our public hearing tonight is 3A, request to approve the Bellevue Papillion Housing Resilient Plan. Applicant, City of Bellevue, case number 189. Staff, any updates?
No updates. And at this time, I would invite our consultant, RDG, to the front, and Ms. Haase will go ahead and present the plan.
Thank you. Thanks, everyone. It's a pleasure to be here before you. My name's Amy Haase with RDG Planning and Design. It was a pleasure having the opportunity to work on this study with the City of Bellevue and Papillion and to learn and hear from residents. So we'll kind of, as I think I said earlier, I realize I'm standing between you and getting home tonight, so we'll make this as quick as possible if my slides will advance. There we go. So what is a housing resilience plan? It really is an opportunity to look at how we can strengthen housing. Did I do that? And strengthen housing to better withstand floods, storms, and other weather-related disasters. And this was probably one of the more interesting pieces we heard through the public engagement process that I'll talk about here in a minute. And that's just how are we really getting better prepared for some of the storms we've been seeing over the last few years. It was an opportunity to identify vulnerable areas, prioritize improvements, and provide some guidelines on more resilient construction. It also began to look at promoting floodproofing, sustainable materials, more energy efficient design, and just overall housing resilience. The housing, so why? Why do we want to do this right now? Well, we're looking for ways that we can reduce the impact from future disasters on our housing stock, and especially our most vulnerable housing stock, which is often also our most affordable housing stock. Look at ways that we can access and support additional funding for our disaster-prone areas. And then finally, prioritizing equitable recovery, especially for our low-income and vulnerable populations like our senior households. That's still not working. How will we use this, or how can this be helpful into the future? It really does, we hope, help develop kind of a proactive approach for addressing risk areas and reducing their impact of these storms on our housing infrastructure, incorporating those strategies into our other plans that you have, fostering collaboration, and finally identifying some of those funding opportunities. Okay, the process we went through started around the end of April or so, and through that we had an online website in which we received a lot of great community feedback. We spent a big chunk of time just really collecting data, analyzing that data, looking at it, from which we could build the policy map, the loss reduction plan, the education plan, and finally some of the funding plan pieces. On the community engagement side, we had a community survey, which we had great response from Bellevue on, and then we also had a map on which people could identify areas of concern, which was actually really helpful in us identifying areas of more flash flooding and specifically areas that were outside of our mapped flood areas. We also had a number of in-person events and engagement, and a few lovely days at the farmers market on Saturday. They were definitely nice. It was a little better than Papillions, where I think it was about 110 degrees. The engagement and some of the key findings we had from that. Education. Not all residents were probably as aware of some of the risks or what they could do to minimize those risks. Housing maintenance, how we could begin to look at improving some of the opportunities and programs and funding sources to just make our housing more resilient and bring buildings back to code. Insurance costs. This was one of the things that bubbled up, I think, from our very first meeting with our committee, and we spent a lot of time kind of exploring and having conversations around this topic. And the rising rates that homeowners are seeing around insurance. And I think one of the things that really just kind of took me, I don't know if by surprise is the right word, but really made me pause. And that was stories we were hearing about usually older senior households who had their homes paid for, but were living on a fixed income and were choosing potentially to drop their insurance because they just couldn't afford the increasing rates, which is scary for them, but it's also scary when we think about the long-term impact that has on our housing stock and probably an affordable unit in our community. And then also just the increased strength and frequency of disasters. And this graphic here probably illustrates this the best. This just really jumped out to our team, and the fact that between 1960 and 1990, we had about 5 or so official disaster declarations, and since 1990, that number has doubled. So we're seeing them more frequently than we have in the past. And so making sure our housing is prepared for that. As I mentioned, we could geek out and spend a lot of time just talking about the data. We hope all of you who are data geeks enjoyed that part of the study. But we spent a lot of time just trying to understand where we had potentially vulnerable areas and what that began to look like. That included mapping our higher risk flood areas, but also looking at the data that residents provided to us. So I mentioned we have the interactive map, and on that map, residents identified locations where they've seen flash flooding or pooling during storms and so forth. And that allowed us to then take a deeper dive and collect more data on stormwater infrastructure in those areas and identify some potential strategies. All of this helped us then begin to get the picture of what your housing resiliency, and we ended up calling it kind of a policy map. Traditionally, they're called kind of a land use map, but really we started to realize, and from the very beginning, that could be pretty confusing with your land use map that's within your comprehensive plan, and that what we were looking at here was not replacing that, but maybe a layer on top of that was more kind of broad brush policy pieces that could work in concert with your comprehensive plan. So we identified 5 specific policy areas. The first one is the no-build areas. So these are generally in our floodway and highest risk flood areas. So you pretty much already have this policy in place. There's a few potential areas in there or projects that have elevated out of these zones, but generally both cities have been really good about making sure people aren't building in these areas. The second area was what we referred to as elevated risk area. So these are areas with steeper slopes, 500-year floodplain, areas with just lower lying areas where we might see that pooling of water. And so if we do develop in those areas, they should be taking those into consideration. One of the topics we heard a lot about from residents through the public engagement process wasn't as much about flooding as I thought, and concerns about flooding, as I thought it was going to be when we started this process, but it was actually concerns about trees and the damage that trees cause to homes and power lines during some of our storm events. So this led us down a path of taking a closer look at the tree canopy, and specifically the tree canopy in our residential areas. As you can see, as the older of the two communities with that kind of historic tree canopy, you have a lot more of that older, what people love these neighborhoods for those reasons, right? The beautiful tree canopy as you get up near the forest. But also that leads to some concerns about the age and viability of some of the older trees. At the same time, we realized, though, we didn't want a plan that was just like, well, you should get rid of your older tree canopy, because that's not healthy either for homes. We see heat island effect and rising costs for utility bills. So we were trying to balance that out, and that actually led to us also evaluating a 4th area for heat island areas. So these are areas that are specifically within our residential neighborhoods where we might want to look at strategies for retreeing and adding some of that canopy to help with reducing some of that heat island effect, reducing homeowners' utility bills. I would point out there are more heat island areas than this in both communities, but we focused it down specifically to residential areas. And then the 5th one is our new development areas. So what policies and programs would we want to see put in place in areas where we're growing into to make sure that these new homes are as resilient as possible? So this then led to the housing loss reduction plan. So we identified the policy areas, but then we began to identify, okay, what are our goals overall when we think about creating more resilient housing? So ensuring that we have safe, resilient, affordable housing, reducing the community's vulnerability to disasters, supporting informed decision-making for both housing and land use overall, building that awareness and collaboration around housing resilience, and then finally strengthening our local capacity for funding and implementation. We then identified in the loss reduction plan kind of 5 major categories: land use, how we build. So some of those code pieces, building code pieces, accommodations. How do we make sure that our existing housing stock is accommodated to make it more resilient, and at the same time, hopefully maintaining some of its affordability? How do we assist some of our most socially vulnerable neighborhoods in making sure that their housing is continuing to be invested in, but there's also strategies for how those individuals would be evacuated during times of emergency. And then finally, stormwater management and policies around improving our stormwater management. The plan also includes a community engagement and education plan. Under this, there were 41 potential partner organizations that were identified, 11 different community event opportunities where we could go out and educate residents on how to improve the resilience of their homes, and then finally 13 example activities that could be applied. And then finally, the mitigation and recovery funding plan, because it's all great, but how are we going to fund this? And I will say, probably back here, I would highlight that the education plan and even some of the loss reduction plan, not all of these recommendations or ideas are things that would always be initiated by the cities. There were things in here that I think would be great partnerships with other organizations or entities in the region. So finally, that mitigation and recovery funding plan, we had plenty of potential funding agencies and partners out there that we began to identify, and we really hope that this is a resource not only for identifying what are some ways we could fund programs to improve resilience, but also some funding sources when the worst happens and we do see a terrible storm come through. So happy to answer any questions you have, and appreciate your time tonight.
Thank you.
Yeah, thanks.
I guess this time I'll open up the public testimony. If anyone cares to provide public testimony in this matter, whether in favor or opposition, please come forward, state your name, address, and sign in. Not seeing anyone. I guess I'll ask the commissioners if they have any questions for our guest tonight.
What are we seeing nationally? Are people adopting changes in their zoning ordinances or in their building codes based on these, or this is kind of the front end of who knows where it leads yet?
I would say, so this plan actually, I didn't share that at the beginning. It's outside of the Gulf Coast areas. As far as we can see, this is probably the first one of these studies that's been done. And I think in those areas, it has definitely led to some things with regards to changes in their zoning, but also just different programs and initiatives that they've been trying to put in place. And obviously for them, it has been predominantly focused around flood reduction and reduction from storm surges. So that was also kind of another interesting part of this, because it went in a different direction, as it should have, for a Midwestern city as opposed to a Gulf Coast area. So, but I do think we are seeing more and more communities that are trying to figure out how do we balance trying to improve the resiliency and the building code piece of it with the affordability piece. And so I think that's a battle that every community is trying to figure out right now. So you're seeing communities kind of pick and choose what some of those things that they're maybe adding to their codes that feel appropriate for their local context. So in a sense, it's a little bit all over the board in what they're choosing.
Tammy, you see anything here that as we go through the zoning ordinance in the next year or two that we probably try to adopt some of this, or again, we're not going to restrict people from planting trees 10 feet from their house? And
Yeah, I think definitely I have money in the budget in 2026 to update the zoning ordinance. That's why this study is timely. We're just coming off of our comprehensive plan, so I think this complements the comprehensive plan, and it definitely puts us in a good position moving forward as we look to update zoning ordinance and also refine our subdivision regulations. So I think there are items that we can carry into those endeavors.
if it's okay, if I can jump in, I was going to say that's probably a great example on the tree planting piece of the education part. Like, how do we just continue to educate residents around the community about the right trees to plant and where to plant them and the importance of planting them. I know right now, they're turning beautiful, right? And they float to your yard. But that's I think where the educational piece can be really important.
Any other comments or questions from the commissioners? Anyone like to make a motion?
I move that we approve the Bellevue Papillion Housing Resilience Plan from the applicant of the City of Bellevue, case number 189.
Second.
Motion by Taylor Jones, second by Ackley. Please vote.
All voting yes, motion carried.
This item will go to City Council for a public hearing on December 16th, 2025.
Thank
Thank
you.
you for your time.